we invite you to like us on Facebook, to give us your comments on the internet. We welcome it. We're going to be playing a major role in the Cover California Affordable Health Care campaign that's kicking off next week. There will be a number of questions about how this works. We are partnering with the state and with several organizations, as well as some local providers. And so we encourage you to read the Voice and Viewpoint, to be in touch with us, to bring us your questions and concerns that you might have in reference to how we're going to implement this legislation, because it has a major impact on all of us. With those things being said, I think we've done all of the housekeeping. I'd like us to get started, and first of all, I'm sorry, there's one other thing. For those who don't know, Chida Warren Darby is the managing editor of the Voice and Viewpoint, and all of your questions or concerns, coverage, inclusion in the paper, those things should be directed to her. I'm still there as publisher and troubleshooter, so I put out the fires and handle all the tough stuff and try to make it easy for her. But beyond that, sometimes people tell me they're going to drop by and see me. You will not see me. If you drop by, unless I know you're there and arrange to meet you, you won't see me there. So we just want to, we're doing this generation in transition, and I'm enjoying the transition, but I'm still here. All right? With that having been said, our first speaker this evening is going to be Mr. Nathan Fletcher. Mr. Fletcher is running as a Democratic candidate for mayor of San Diego, and seated next to him is Mr. Aquirre, who will speak afterwards. I would like for Mr. Fletcher to take 2 or 3 minutes to give you the highlights of what he's going to do and what he's about. And based on the audience, I'm going to be trying to be flexible, but I'll just wave at you if it's going a little bit further, okay?
If I go too long.
All right.
I'll try not to do that. My wife told me brevity is not my strength. Dr. Warren, I want to respect your rules. Well, good evening. It's an honor to be here with you. I look out, I see so many friends I've known for years, and some of you that are new. I am David Fletcher. I'm a candidate for mayor. Somebody asked me on the way in, they said, are you of the Fletchers of Fletcher Hills or Fletcher Cove or Fletcher Parkway? And I say I am not. I'm from the factory working Fletcher family. I did tell those Fletchers that they want to put me in their will, I would be happy to take it. But I grew up in a working class blue collar family. I've really lived the American dream. The first one of my family to go to college. I joined the Marine Corps. My dad became a police officer when the factory closed. My mom ran shelters for battered women and children. So it's kind of a service family. And I joined the Marine Corps, which brought me to San Diego, which is where I've been. Served in the Marine Corps, then served in the State Assembly, and ran for mayor last time. Came up just a little bit short, and then went to work both teaching as a professor at UCSD, and then doing some really fascinating work at Qualcomm. And you know, I think the circumstances that brought us here tonight were unfortunate, and I think in so many ways, you know, a lot of us would rather not be in this situation. But finding ourselves here, I think out of the crisis, we have to try and find the best opportunity moving forward. And I believe that there's a great opportunity to really start the work of rebuilding our city and rebuilding it in a fairer, more equitable, more distributed fashion. I know from talking to so many folks who are here about the inequities we've seen in San Diego over the course of the last 20 years that have developed. I know from talking to Reverend Laster some of the problems with contracting, making sure that local San Diegans are getting hired. And that's an issue that we would like to address. I know from talking to your councilwoman, Myrtle Pohl, there's problems with restaurants and grocery stores and folks having access to it. I know Ms. Pearl Brown, who's here, I've been out to her street, Oreo Street, I'll never forget it. 35 years, it's never been paved. And I think when I talked to Reese Jarrett, my friend, about some of the economic opportunities that have been lacking, I think we all see that there is an opportunity to rebuild a city, to actually invest in our neighborhoods, something our last mayor talked a lot about, and he was right, to rebuild those. When I recently announced some endorsements from some public safety groups, we came to communities that have longer response times. And that's not right. One community shouldn't get a first responder in 7 minutes and the other get it in 9.5 minutes. That's not morally right. No one should have to wait, but it's been a lack of investment in an equitable fashion. So I really think investing in our neighborhoods, making sure all of our communities are safe. And then today we rolled out the first phase of our jobs plan in terms of making sure that folks have opportunities to get good jobs, to get good wages. I came out of the middle class, out of the working class, and I think over the course of the recession that we saw, we've seen the erosion of that, and in the course of the recovery, we've seen the average hourly wages of American workers go down. And I think that forces us to really look inside and try and come up with some better solutions, some new ideas, some better ways of doing things. And so I'm excited about the opportunity in front of us, and the campaign has got off to a great start, and just a great privilege and thrilled to be here with all of you tonight. Is that good? Am I out of time?
You're good.
I was nervous. I didn't want to get in trouble with my first one. Thank you very much.
What happens when you, Mike, before you start, what happens is the more you do it, the better you get at it. Just about election time, you have it down. I also want to acknowledge that we have Reverend Ray Smith here with us this evening, and we have two city council members, City Council Member Myrtle Cole of this district. Councilwoman Cole, where are you? Oh, all right. And we have Council Member Raquel Vasquez of Lemon Grove. City Council. All right. We always want to acknowledge our members who take the time to come out and be with us. Did I miss anyone else passed away? Also, we have in the audience here, of course, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge him, the Dean of San Diego Politics, Mr. Leon Williams. Leon, would you please stand? Very first elected official. All right. And still giving wisdom and going strong. We're glad to have you here with us. All right. Now we'll hear from Mr. Mike Aquirre, former city attorney, and I think everyone knows him. So Mr. Aquirre, if you would just go ahead.
Well, I wasn't nervous until I heard you say that Supervisor Williams was here. Now I'm nervous. It's an honor to be in front of so many celebrities. Nobody told me that. I thought this was a community meeting. So I'm particularly impressed to have an opportunity. You know, I was thinking about this last night. For me, coming home to the 4th District is coming home because 23 years ago, I sat in the courthouse down at the federal courthouse and drew the boundaries of the 4th District to ensure that for the first time, we would have the African-American voters deciding who their official was, not having to depend on an appointment. And the Reverend George Stevens, who was a very unique politician, but he came from the people. And that was the whole point of the voting rights laws. That's why we brought the voting rights case that I was the counsel for, that gave the 4th District the opportunity to elect a person of color, who gave the 8th District the opportunity. And those changes, Dr. King told us that progress does not roll in on the wheels of inevitability. Progress comes because people make sacrifices, and they struggle, and they work hard, and they endure. And that's what I'm going to do for you when I'm mayor. We're not going to appoint the Building Contractor Association members to the outreach programs that we have for minority contractors when I'm mayor. We're not going to do that. We're not going to have the people that are against the program administering the program. And let me say something else. We have seen all these crooked banks getting bailed out by the Federal Reserve Board to the tune of $16 trillion because they lost their profits because of their abuses. But we never hear anything about the federal government, the Federal Reserve, bailing out the unemployment problem here in San Diego and throughout the nation. We have a 14%, almost 14% unemployment problem in the African-American community. Now, if we had a 14% unemployment problem in the community at all, there would be a national emergency declared. I think if 14% is not acceptable, And as your mayor, I believe that the city of San Diego should be the employer of last resort. If the private enterprise system cannot function successfully, if it can't get the job done, that's what FDR said. He gave the private enterprise system an opportunity to function, to show that they could have and achieve full employment. And when they didn't, he used the government to provide employment. The way we are now is to say, well, you know, people are unemployed, there's nothing we can do about it. That's not an acceptable answer. It is no longer a question of you going to anyone with hat in hand, because you have the political power. You have a member of the city council, and you have the ability to affect the outcome of this race, the mayor's race. And you have in front of you somebody, I'm not just coming here for the first time. I've been part of this struggle with you. Those of you that have been businesses that have been seeking contracts from the city, you know I represented you when we sued the city. And when I was the city attorney, we adopted through the city attorney's office the affirmative action plan that the University of California, San Diego has. I don't believe that affirmative action is over. I don't believe that we don't need minority and women contracting and reaching out efforts. I think that we do need that. And so I am here tonight to tell you that things are coming, change is coming. As I always tell everyone, and I like Nathan Fletcher, I think he's a coming. Endorse Nathan, endorse David Alvarez, but vote for Mike Aquirre.
Spoken like a true politician. Okay, as we know, this special election is going to be November 19th. It's not a great number of weeks away. We know that this campaign is citywide, and we know that people in various communities have issues and concerns. And we're hoping tonight that as you raise your questions and you make your comments, that you will focus on those things in a laser-like format that are most important to us, that are obtainable or that can be realized. We just don't want to be grabbing for, you know, pie in the sky, things that can't get done in a period of time that we're working with. There was an agenda that was in place that this community was greatly in support of with Mayor Filner. There's a concern about how many of those things will be continued in terms of those things that were started. There are concerns about the role and relationship of people of color in the community to the city, those who both work in the city and outside of the city. So I would like to open it up for you to come up to the mic, and as you prepare to do that, I'm going to give a moment in respect to our organizational heads who are here. Give them an opportunity. If they have comments, you can start thinking of your comments. And if someone raises a question that you had in mind, then please don't come up and repeat the question. Let's just go with the answer, and we'll be able to take it from there. So on the front row here, I would like to have the organizational heads have an opportunity to speak first, and then meeting is not the same as a forum. I keep saying this over and over because it seems to be an alien concept to the West Coast.
Is this on?
Organizational heads first.
Okay. Good evening again. I'm Charlie Wilson, the president of the San Diego branch of the NAACP. My question is, what is your position on the Affordable Care Act and whether you support it?
Okay, and try to focus your answers to it, because that's the kind of question that could really take us off into the wild blue. There's so much to it.
You want me to be brief?
Yeah, go ahead.
I support it.
You don't have to be quite that.
All right, I'm trying to behave.
Okay.
I'm going to follow the rules.
All right, go right ahead, please.
You know, I do. I had a when I was a child, you know, I just grew up in a working class family, but we had health care, and I was very fortunate. And you know, one of the things out of the Affordable Care Act, I think that most resonated with me was allowing kids to maintain on their parents' insurance for a period of time. And I'll tell you a story of why that connected with me. And everyone, our life experience shapes us, and it shapes kind of why we believe what we believe. And after college, I started working, and my employer didn't offer it. and I wasn't able to be on the college program, and I wasn't able to be on my parents' program, and I didn't have health insurance, but I was what they call the young and invincible, ones that don't get sick, so I just said, well, I'll be okay. And then I broke my nose really bad. Depending on which version of the story you believe, it was either playing racquetball or in a fight outside a bar. My mom believes one, my best friend believes the other. Only one of them was an eyewitness, I won't tell you which one. But I didn't have any health care. My nose was broke. And I had a distant relative who was a ear, nose, and throat doctor. And I tracked him down, and he said, well, I can't, is your insurance? I said, I don't have insurance. And he said, well, I can't fix it. I said, well, I can't breathe. And we went through this whole deal. And then finally I said, well, can't you just get the anesthesiologist to hook you up? Like you do, barter, I don't know what you do, something. And he said, no, the hospital and the whole deal. And I said, well, what did you do before you had anesthesiologists? And before, like if Moses broke his nose, what would have happened? And he said, well, I guess technically I could do it under local. I said, well, how much would that cost? He said, well, I'll just do it. And I went and sat in his office, and I got an injection in each cheek, and he gave me a towel, and he said, bite the towel. And he re-broke and re-cracked my nose while I was awake and tried to get it back straight. And it just really, it's the first time in my life that I hadn't had health care, through no fault. And everyone's in different circumstances, and you have different things. And as a parent now, my child, my oldest boy was 5. I have a 5-year-old, and then my baby was 2. My oldest boy just had a fairly intensive surgery on his kidney. And I remember sitting at Children's Hospital, we were there for 4 days, and just telling my wife, what would we do if we didn't have coverage? And what would we do for our baby? And I know there's a lot of folks that are in that situation. But I think because of that, we got to really look for ways that we can get more people coverage, we can get a better coverage, we can get more people in the system. And so because of that, I support it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gary. And I just want to let the 2 candidates know that we've been joined by Mr. David Alvarez. Mr. Gary, after you answer the question, I'm going to pass the mic to Mr. Alvarez and let him make his intro comments.
I support, and let me say why. When I announced in the FDR Grove at Balboa Park, all reference to the FDR Grove in Balboa Park has been removed from the official records of the park. Nobody knew where the grove was. And the reason I selected the FDR Grove was because I ascribed to what FDR did in January of 1944 when he announced the Economic Bill of Rights. And what he said was to have decency and dignity, we needed to provide people with a job that gave them remuneration to support their family and have some recreation and to get an education. And one of the things he said was to have health care, that was an essential, that was an economic part of the Economic Bill of Rights. In 1980, I worked very closely on Senator Edward Kennedy's campaign. I was very close with the Kennedy family, and I worked up in Los Angeles then. I want to tell you, you may not remember this, but it was a dream of Senator Kennedy's that he was never able to achieve health care. And when President Obama became president, he had a lot of different choices to make, and he was very criticized. But I think that President Obama, out of a deep love and regard for Senator Kennedy, decided to make Senator Kennedy's dream come true. And he embraced and put forward what no other president has been able to do, which is to have universal health care. I don't just support universal health care, but I celebrate it because it's an achievement that FDR announced that he was after in 1944, that Edward Kennedy worked almost his entire career as a senator to achieve and wasn't able to. And then President Obama made that possible.
All right. I want to ask again, I know that there's a latent professor in you, but we're going to skip the history and just zero in on a brief answer for the benefit of the masses so they can keep up with us. Mr. David Alvarez, Council Member David Alvarez, we're glad to have you. What we're doing is allowing each of you to make opening remarks, a couple of minutes, and then we will be opening it up to them again.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the community for being here. It's a distinct honor to be a council member in the city of San Diego and having served for the last 3 years. I'm running for mayor because I believe this is a time for our community. It's a time for the community to actually have a voice at the table. We have been neglected, whether it's this community, the community that I represent, and many other communities throughout the city, have been ignored and neglected for far too long. That's why I ran for office 3 years ago. And that's why I'm running for mayor this time around. The powers that have controlled this city, who have really basically had a puppet in the mayor's office for far too long, are just getting excited about the opportunity to do it again. I think they know that this is a window opportunity that unless they win it this time, they might not win it again, and they don't want to lose out. And the truth is, I've served under administrations where I faced the test as to whether I actually believe in the community or I believe in the downtown special interests that have controlled the city. I've passed that test. I've shown leadership. I've shown courage. I came in and had a $47 million budget deficit. We were cutting essential services to our community. Our libraries. My library was very important to me growing up in Logan Heights. I didn't have a computer. I didn't have an encyclopedia set. I went to Memorial Academy, and right after school I went over to the library. That's where I was able to do my research, do my homework, get on a computer, print out my reports. Our libraries were being threatened when I came in office. Our fire stations were being browned out, meaning they weren't servicing the community. Our parks were no longer being maintained at the same level. Our rec centers were being closed. What have we done since then? We eliminated wasteful spending, and now we're increasing services. Right here in this community, we've invested and ensured that we rebuild Skyline Hills Library. Finally, after so many years, it's going to get built. That was under a bond that we passed at City Council, supporting my colleague at the time, Tony Young, and now supporting my colleague, Myrtle Bull. We've ensured that the teen center nights at the Encanto Rec Center were open during the summer, so the kids could have a place to go during the summer rather than be out in the streets. I have a record that reflects the values of this community, that reflects the values of the people, the hard-working people in the city that haven't had a chance for far too long. We need a mayor who's actually going to give us a chance, and that's what I represent. Thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alvarez. A couple of housekeeping rules. Number one, if you have a cell phone, you might want to put it on vibrate so it doesn't ring. Number two, I continue to recognize our pastors as they're here. Pastor Thompson, Pastor Miller, thank you for coming out and being with us. Number three, I want to let you know that in inviting the candidates that we saw here, there were a lot of people that signed up. 4 people we felt that were the major candidates based on what the city is doing. We tried very hard to get Mr. Kevin Faulkner to join us. He could not put it in his schedule to be here, and I think it's very important that you remember who came and who didn't come. And a very special note of appreciation and respect to our candidates who are here, because you cannot come to me and tell me that another community is more important than our community when we vote just like everybody else does. And so that last Sunday before the election, when they start running to your churches smiling, smile and keep going. Pastors, no time in the pulpit for people who didn't have time to be here with us. Okay? We want to put an end to that. You can run in the black church at the last minute, smile, and say amen, hallelujah, and that gets it. That day is over. All right? Again, I also want you to know that we have over 130 people here so far this evening, and people are still coming. And it's very important that you know that we have a sizable turnout. That's why we were sharing this with the candidates, that our community is concerned about this, and that you are a cross-section of the community in terms of the people represented tonight. Mr. Walter Lamb, do you have any questions or comments? You can use that mic there. Mr. Lamb is Executive Director of the Alliance for African Assistance.
My question was directed to Honorable David Alvarez. Several years be given directly from the Office of Council Members. And now we have a body that has been formed that does that evaluation. You talked of unfair, inequitable distributions of resources. Do you believe the system that we have now for CDBG is fair and our community is getting what we deserve and your community is getting what it deserves as well?
That's a great question, and I absolutely do not think that our communities are getting what we deserve. We represent the highest level of low-income communities in the city of San Diego, yet we do not see that same level of money coming back into our communities. The previous process was every council member got a pot of money and distributed. Well, there's only like 2 or 3 census tracts, and let me correct that, because somebody will probably fact check that. I don't know if it's 2 or 3, but it's a very small number of census tracts in, for example, District 1, the La Jolla area of the city of San Diego. And they were getting the same amount of money, potentially, that other communities were getting. That's completely an unfair process. The process that exists today was try to remove the politicization of the selection of CDBG funding. I don't think it's good enough either. I've proposed, and in my plan for economic development for our city, I'm going to ensure that communities, 3 communities in particular, receive the funding that comes from CDBG. Southeast community, City Heights community, and San Isidro. There's something called the Neighborhood Revitalization Strategy Areas that HUD allows every city to engage in that process so that we can channel and we can fund, using our CDBG funding, 3 improvements in those 3 neighborhoods to increase jobs so that the unemployment level goes down, to increase quality housing, and to increase economic development in general. This is the only way, this process, and I know it very well because I spent so much time, it's the only way to ensure that the money comes into the communities that actually deserve it. Because we get that money from the federal government based on our low-income populations, and there's no reason why we should be spreading this money to other parts of the city when the money is intended to be spent in our communities that really, really need them. And that's what I'll make sure we do.
Time, thank you.
Did you want us also to respond? Okay, well, let me just say ditto to what David said. And then let me add on to it that when I was city attorney, I worked with the HUD officials to carry out an audit of the grant funds that we received, and what we found is that there was wholesale misuse of those funds for years. There was loans that were promised and never repaid. Money that was, even going back as far, and I don't mean to go back in history, but even going back to the U.S. Grand Hotel, where the money was used, poverty money was used. The purpose of poverty money is to fight poverty. The purpose of poverty money is not to give more to those who already have the ability, without those funds, to be successful. And so when we talk about an even distribution of poverty funds, that has to be conditioned by the fact that it's being distributed in the census tracts in which poverty is clearly established and is clearly the basis for the funds that we get in the first place. So that's how it's been working up to this point. We'll talk more about this a little later because I've been a little nervous that John...
Thank you. Mr. Fletcher.
Thanks, Mike. I know, Dr. Warren, you call me whatever you want, so you call me Mr. Fletcher. I said, that's my dad. I said, you can call me Nathan. But I think we're all in agreement on this point, that those funds ought to go to the communities that have the greatest need. But it's not just that. I mean, this is a citywide problem that affects a lot of things. You see it with infrastructure. You see it with where streets get paved, where sidewalks get repaired, where streetlights get installed. I mentioned earlier the problem in response times. You know, it's not right that you have one community that calls 911 and gets their first responder in 7 minutes, and you have another community that calls and waits 9.5 minutes. And so I think you need a mayor that's going to commit to working with the members of the council. It is my great hope that I can help David Alvarez stay on the city council and work with him. because I think his heart's 100% in the right place. I think you have another great member of the council here, Myrtle Cole. When I met with her, the first thing she said, all I care about is my district, District 4. She said, we don't have restaurants with tablecloths. We don't. She said, why don't we? We need more. But we need a mayor that's going to go and meet with the restaurant folks and go like, look, you benefit from everything happening in the city. We need you to go other places. We need to have groceries. We need to make sure that we have that. And you need a mayor who's going to be willing to push. I've been working on an economic development project, pushing some of our technology companies to come down there. Maybe do a job training center. Because you got out-of-work people who they'll work hard. They just need the skills. Today in our job plan we rolled out, I talked about manufacturing because I haven't given up on the American worker. I haven't given up on the middle class. I haven't given up. But what it takes is retraining you and putting you back out into that job market in a way. So how do we have job training centers and incubators, and how do we have assistance for small ones? And final point, Dr. Moore, I would point to examples. I learned something from Mike Aquirre here. I'm going to make a quick historical reference, but it's quick. I'm a veteran. I served 10 years in the Marine Corps. I fought overseas. I came home. And one of the most successful pieces of public policy we ever had was the GI Bill. Now, the GI Bill is known as just paying for college. But the GI Bill did more than just pay for college. The GI Bill provided unemployment assistance. The GI Bill provided living assistance. The GI Bill provided money for you to get your high school diploma if you didn't have it, for you to get a vocational education or training if you didn't have it. And it provided low-interest mortgages, and it provided money to start a small business. And that approach helped create the middle class of that era. And I think we need a similar type of approach with those who have been displaced by the change in the economy. And I think that a mayor can lead that effort to make sure that all communities have that opportunity and that access that the question is about.
Okay, here's what we're going to do at this point. We have 20 minutes remaining before Mr. Fletcher leaves in terms of his designated time. Those who have questions, I want you to line up at the mics so that we get the benefit of those questions. And I don't want to neglect our remaining organizational presidents, but I'm going to ask that the two questions that left, if Dr. Blair or Minister Hugh have questions, that you, as candidates, limit your remarks to a minute so that we can maximize this and then we can continue after that, all right? And I have a timer here, Dr. Blair.
My question is this: the federal government's present contracting target goals to include ethnic minorities is 48%. Of course, that includes disabled veterans, women, Latinos, African Americans, etc. Presently, the city of San Diego is giving contract opportunities at less than 1%, especially to African Americans. You'll be in the unique position if elected to be a strong mayor that has a lot of say-so over department heads and prime contractors giving out contracts. If elected mayor, what would you go about in narrowing that gap of what the federal government gives in opportunities, which is at 48% on public dollar contracts, and the city's terrible goal of less than 1% of contracts that are given to African Americans?
I will tell you what I...
Just a moment, it's going to be a 1-minute answer. I just want to alert you as you get started. Yes.
First, I will use Roz Winstead. She'll be deeply involved in helping to design my program. Number two, we won't put the people that are against contracting out onto the enforcement committees that oversee it. And number three, although we cannot have specific targets, we'll have specific plans to expand the number of minority contractors. The problem that we have is that we're not sharing the contracts. I'm not interested in more training. I'm not interested, you got to go over here, come over here, get back over there. What I want to see is contracts being let out to African American, women-owned, Latino businesses, and I want to see those going up. And just as you said, in Los Angeles, how come they can do that in Los Angeles, but they can't do that here in San Diego?
Time. Thank you.
That was about a minute. Okay. I know my time frame here. I think that it ought to match the community as a whole. And I think, you know, I feel like sometimes there's an era where it's decided who's going to get it before it gets issued. And I don't think that that's an environment that should be tolerated. I think that everyone needs to have an equal access and an equal shot. And I also support local hire provisions. If we're taking your tax dollars, then your tax dollars ought to go back to you. And there's an economic benefit to that. There's a city benefit to that. Now, you know, I mean, you got to be competitive. I mean, you can be a little bit more than maybe someone from some other state. But folks are competitive. They'll work hard, and we want that money to stay here local. We want to make sure that there's an equitable distribution of how you do it. And we want to make sure that it's not a decision that's being made before the process, so everyone's got a shot at this.
Thank you. Mr. Alvarez?
Thank you. One of the first things you got to ensure that you do as a strong mayor, you oversee all of the department heads of the city. There's going to have to be some accountability there. The accountability has to come from the department heads who enter into a lot of these contracts. Who are they contracting with, and why are they picking the same people over and over and over again? That's how you get the accountability. That's the first thing you can do, and you can do that on day one. You don't need to wait months, you don't need to wait years, you can do that on day one. Second of all, the city of San Diego is way behind in going forward in a bidding process that's transparent, so that everybody has an equal shot, so that everybody can know when these bids are available for them. So we got to get that system up, Planet Bids. We got to get it up and running, so that everybody knows what is up in terms of work, that they can get automatic emails if you got an email system, that you get the information that's all centrally located, so it's not someone who's got a list somewhere in some desk, and you have the phone number to that department head, and that's how you get the information. Those are the two easy things you can do to change that immediately.
Thank you. Did you have a question? You'll pass. Thank you. All right, then we'll take our first question over here, since we were on that side. We give your name and raise your question briefly or comment.
Thank you. Today, San Diego, my name is Mikhail. Today in San Diego Union Tribune, I look at the pictures of our candidates, San Diego Mayoral Debate. I look at the picture of Nathan Fletcher and David Alvarez. Nathan Fletcher looks to me a little bit too far from me to get to know. And rising star, David Alvarez, quite appealing. However, today personally, I met Nathan. I came to Mr. Fletcher, he's saying to me, call me Nathan. Nathan, a people's choice. Nathan for mayor. I can see that in San Diego Union Tribune and elsewhere. I can see also a rising star, David Alvarez. My question is to you, not complicated, and I'm going to bore you. What are you going to do? How are you going to advance plight for senior and disabled people?
Thank you. Just as a matter of record, when we have town hall, they can make comments or questions, but we're not going to have speeches and then questions. Okay? Is your question to who?
My question to all panel.
Okay, thank you.
How do they advance what they can do for senior and disabled people? Specifically and simple.
All right.
Thank you very much. I am a proud son of an 80-year-old man who lives with me. That's my father. I'm very, very passionate about families taking care of their own in their own home. When my wife and I were married over 5 years ago, we decided to bring my elderly father with me, because that's the respect and the honor that my tradition and my culture gives to the elderly, the elders who have raised us, and I thank God that he does live with me. It's very important. So what do? We got to continue. There's some basic things that the city needs to do on the infrastructure front, making sure we can build sidewalks so people can actually get to their house. This year, we approved over $2 million for Holly Drive, 1 street here in District 4. That's been missing sidewalks. And there's a whole bunch more. It's not the only one. And so the infrastructure needs to be in place so that people can go and from to they can catch the public transit, so they can go to appointments. So infrastructure is the first thing that's easy to do.
Thank you.
My primary focus is going to be to get the libraries open and to get the rec centers open, which many elderly people use. Now think about this. We spend about $56 million a year for our public works program. We spend about $113 million for our parks. And we spend about $39 million for our libraries. But our pension is $275 million. And all but 50 of that is interest on the $2.379 billion that is deficit. It was $5.6 billion total. Now it's $8 billion. The payment used to be $161 in 2005. Now it's $275. Where does all that money come from? All that money comes from programs that could be helping the elderly, money that could be used to repave our streets, keep our libraries open. And so when people talk about that they're going to do this...
I think there's a number of things. I think what David mentioned is really good in terms of making sure sidewalks and you have there's issues with having the crosswalk, the signal go longer in areas where you have senior populations or folks who have disabilities. There's a lot you can do working with your transit agencies to make sure that those are wheelchair accessible. I think especially coming out of so many of my buddies who came back without limbs, I've worked a lot and I've seen a lot and understood, I think, in a much more meaningful way how important those are. And then last February I visited a senior center and they told me a story about building a center for homeless seniors. They were getting them off the street and putting them here. And they were required to put in 3 floors of underground parking for the beds that they had. And it cost them millions of dollars. Well, homeless seniors don't have cars. But they didn't have a city that would work with them to figure out how to make it work for them. Now, how many more seniors could we have housed if we'd been willing to work with them? Because it's empty. It's just an empty room. And so I have a mayor who's going to be aggressive on things like that and make a difference.
Thank you.
6 p.m. to 8 p.m., there were over 200 people there. And if you would have saw their eyes, the hope and despair, because people come in this community time and time and time, saying they're going to create jobs, and enough is enough. So I want to know specifically, how are you going to work comprehensively? The problem is I see in America's finest city is African Americans are not getting their share of the pie as far as employment. They're not being treated fairly in the workforce.
Ms. Robinson, we have your question.
Okay, so 3 things. Are you willing to sign some type of proclamation to say that, yes, we are really going to come into this committee, in this community in the 4th district, and that African Americans at 14%, they're going to get their share of the pie.
All right.
Just stop, playing to the cameras. Thank you.
To the candidates, each person has a minute to respond, so you can't do the whole question. You'll have to pick a part, I guess,
Okay.
in terms of responding.
Let me just say this. The government should be the employer of last resort. And as I said before, what Franklin Roosevelt said, which is if the free enterprise system cannot do the job, and it's not doing the job, then the government has to do the job, period. 500,000 people worked in the Civilian Conservation Corps during the time that FDR was the president. Now, how can they have done more in 1933 about employment than we can do in 2013? And that's what we have to change. If the free enterprise system can't do the job, then the government has to be the employer of last resort.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mike is absolutely right that the free enterprise system is not doing its job here. And so that's why I believe that government is part of the solution. You'll hear other people say that government is part of the problem. I don't think it is in communities where there's high unemployment rate. Government it is part of the problem because they're not doing anything about it. And so what I'm proposing specifically, I'm talking about these neighborhood revitalization strategy areas. There's $10 million of funding that's coming into the city now, this HUD funding. And we're not leveraging in any way so that we can get private investment that creates jobs by construction, that builds housing, that builds new businesses opportunities, new commercial opportunities. We've got to focus the resources that are now so limited coming from the state and federal government focus in the areas that actually need that investment. We're not doing that. Downtown raised their CCDC ability to get all that redevelopment money. They forgot about us. They've always forgotten about us.
Time.
It's time that they start thinking about us first.
Mr. Fletcher is going to have to leave at this point, so I want you to make your comment if you want to respond. I guess you'll have to arrange to continue your questions with him beyond this point.
So to answer your question directly, I think it's probably three things. And one of the things I've called for is the creation of the Southeast San Diego Economic Advisory Council to map out these strategies in a comprehensive way and in a real way. And so I think it's a couple things. It's training, which I mentioned earlier. You got folks that want to work hard, right? But the world's changed, and the jobs that are available today are different, and we got to train folks. We got to train them for those jobs. The second thing I think is education, and I think it's having a mayor who's going to work with our schools and our community colleges and our K through 12 and our universities to make sure that you're doing, and there's a lot a mayor can do to help out schools. There's joint use things, there's permitting, there's a whole lot that a mayor can do. Because if that child quality K through 12 education, man, that's the ticket. Then they can go on to college or vocational training. So I think it's training for folks who are in the workforce now but aren't able to find a job. It's education. And then the final one's opportunity. You just need to make sure folks have an equal opportunity, that they have a chance, that they have the opportunity to get work, that they have the opportunity to get small business loans, that they have the opportunity to get city contracts. And I think having a mayor whose heart really understands how small business is different than big business, and make sure that small business, you understand how difficult those are to set up and start, and really welcomes that. And then I'll just take 30 seconds, Dr. Warren, if I can, and just say, I'm sorry I have to leave, I have another commitment. It's an honor to be here tonight. If I didn't get to your question, you can go to our website, nathanfletcher.com, call us, email, text, come by the office, however you want to communicate. I'd love to answer your question. And I look forward to working with each and every single one of you as we talk about the rebuilding of our city. And then if I'm fortunate to be the mayor, as we actually come down and actually get to work. And Mike has given us every historical quote, so I would feel inadequate if I didn't close with one. A lot of the things that haven't been addressed for decades haven't been addressed because they're hard, and it's difficult. And as David pointed out, it requires change and a different approach. Somebody said, well, those are hard things you're talking about. And so to close in a quote from one of my favorite presidents, he said, we choose to do these things not because they're easy, but because they're hard. And I think we need a mayor that's ready to roll up his sleeves and do the hard work and ask the tough questions, demand better results, and bring coalitions together and drive through to make sure that all of our neighborhoods are feeling better, more equitable San Diego. So thank you very, very much for letting me join you this evening. I look forward to coming back, Dr. Warren. Thank you.